Hello, everyone. I am just honored and thrilled to have Njideka with us today. We've known each other only recently through Microsoft, but I'm going to turn it over to her to introduce herself.
Yeah,
Welcome, my friend.
thank you. Thanks, Bobby. It's certainly an honor to be here. I mean, yes, we did meet last year at the Microsoft Alumni Connect 2025 event, which was really a beautiful event in Redmond, Washington. And I really appreciated getting to know your work better since then as well. Super grateful for this invitation. We've been snowed in all week here on the East Coast, but I've really been looking forward to this conversation because, respect, particularly in leadership teams in the workplace and even as far as the boardroom is something that I deeply, deeply care about. And, I truly appreciate your lived experiences, how you've shaped leadership philosophy as well, because that resonates with me very, very deeply. And my approach to leadership, governance, and respect really has been shaped just as much by my lived experiences and my formal roles. So I'm really excited to have this conversation with you. I'm in Njideka, Harry, and I have spent the last 15 years or so working in the architecture of the social entrepreneurship and social impact space, really marshaling the forces of business and social enterprise to move systems change forward in addressing some of the world's hardest to solve issues. And so I'm based here in Washington, D.C. It's a pleasure to be with you tonight, Bobby.
Oh, likewise, my friend. And your talk at the Microsoft Connect still really resonates with me. So please give us a glimpse, give the listeners a glimpse as to what that topic was and why you're so passionate about that topic, because I think it really connects with respect. Let's do that first.
Yeah, sure. My topic was really around AI, artificial intelligence, and really looking at the use of artificial intelligence, particularly in development work. And so my work over the last 15 years has been really focused on ensuring that as technology moves and as we have more and more technology, whether it's artificial intelligence or whatever is next, we are really, really keeping at the center of the development the human aspect of things, right? Especially when you think about how advances in technology, how they exacerbate inequalities, especially for people living in the global south. And so, having done this work for many, many years, just starting off kind of thinking about the role of young people in the development of technology, not just as users of the technology, but really as creators and innovators of the technology that's more applicable to their community and the solutions that they envision for their community. Of course, as the technology has rapidly moved forward, it's very important that we ensure that these young people still have the resources and the tools to be able to keep up with that learning and continue to change their communities in the best way possible.
Yeah, just brilliant. I was so inspired. Thank you for that work. And I really hope that with all the hype about AI, more of us will be talking about the human factor. Adoption is a big issue in enterprises, but really, are we taking the time to look at that human factor so that there's, reducing the fear of entering and testing and trying and really creating that growth mindset with how we approach
Absolutely.
it for people in organizations. Great, my friend. So please, yes, I love your framing. We did decide we're going to keep this to a very high level around really respect in the workplace, but at the board level, not even just C-suite, but board level that you are working very closely with. So please keep that filter in mind. So from that perspective, how would you define respect?
Sure, respect in the workplace, which of course bleeds into the boardroom, so to speak, is, often treated as a cultural or an HR issue, right? But from a board or a CEO perspective, it's more than that. I mean, it's actually a governance issue and an issue around risk and value creation. So, when respect in itself breaks down in leadership spaces, especially in the boardroom, organizations and companies, there's loss of information, there's loss of trust, and ultimately loss and degradation of enterprise value, right? So when I think about respect, really, I define respect at work really as the consistent practice of protecting human dignity while pursuing performance. So really think about this as treating everyone really as somebody's precious child, right? It's not about politeness, right? It's about whether people can show up, people can tell the truth without fear, whether power is used responsibly, and is designed to whether the system is designed so that the right information, the most accurate information, can reach the decision makers in a timely fashion and at the right time. So in the boardroom, for instance, respect shows up as a governance behavior, right? We create the conditions where management can really bring risks early, where dissent is welcomed as part of stewardship, and where questions are asked to understand rather than asked to, shame a particular person or a particular group or unit, right? So respect is really the foundation of trust. That's really how I see it. And that trust then allows a team or a team of teams, especially the board and the CEO, to make high quality decisions under sometimes a tremendous amount of uncertainty.
Thank you so much. You're really speaking what I believe in is I always say respect is not a soft skill. It's actually a hard skill.
Yes.
And it's critical to have that safety so that we can have healthy conflict. I do find, I don't know, I know you're working much more globally, but in the US, I find there is we're really at the two ends. We're either very passive aggressive and just like you said, the kind cultures where people are just being polite, but not speaking their truth. And on the other hand, yes, a lot of the startup world can be very direct, very rude, which is also toxic and unhealthy. So, but let's not forget that the healthy, mature place for leaders is really in the middle. So thank you for that.
Absolutely. And I mean, you mentioned toxicity in the workplace. One of, the pieces that you shared with me earlier, Bobby, indicated that, companies in the US in particular, some research showed that they're losing about 50 billion due to toxic workplaces. So this is not just a fairness, fluffy, soft imperative. This is like a bottom line economic imperative, right? The importance to create these spaces that are really psychologically safe for people, assets who are, people as the most important assets of these companies is extremely important. And you can look at this across the spectrum. There's in the companies, there's in the boardroom. In some of my free time also, I also have the luxury of actually coaching my 17-year-old twin girls volleyball team. And as part of that, I recently just read a book. It's called The Twin Thieves. That's what the book is called. I don't know if you've read it. What clearly struck me, even in sports, for instance, is how it demonstrates and shows that fear and ego quietly steal from teams, right? They still trust, they still voice, and ultimately performance. So if there's one moment that really we should be thinking about, it's, how can we ensure that we are collaborative and we are ensuring that there's psychological safety in the workplace. This belief that you can speak up, this belief that you can challenge assumptions and you can still belong is applicable in the workplace, is applicable in boardrooms and also on courts in teams.
I love that. I'm glad you brought that in because I think I'm not a sports person, but I think a lot of people relate to that. And if we get that mindset around, how would you behave if we're a team on the court in a volleyball or a basketball or any sport that you like? And the other piece, just to really play back again, is that earlier when you're defining it, to have the mindset of how would you treat your own child? Even if you don't have children, if you're listening, we all know what that feels like and how to be treated by parents that really care for you. And hopefully everyone has had that, but not everyone does. But we know what we want there. So I
Yes,
think that that's a very human barometer of how to
yes,
think about it. Lovely.
absolutely.
So if you could now, I would say really, if you're open to it, keep it personal to how you've experienced respect when it is there. What are some of those experiences you've had when you felt in the work culture or on the board that you've been respected and that it's present with for others as well.
Right. I think, it's very important for leaders to model respect in real time, right? So this is not performative, or it should not be performative, right? It's important for leaders to pay close attention to how conversations unfold, right? Whether in the boardroom or otherwise. Who is getting interrupted? Who gets airtime? Are questions genuinely curious, or are they, like I said, performative or shaming? And when someone, surfaces an uncomfortable truth, does the room actually lean in or does it shut down, right? So people take the accuse very quickly from the top. And if inquiry is rewarded rather than shut down, people tend to speak up. But if it's punished, even subtly, silence follows. And so I've seen this happen numerous times, across several different types of boardrooms, right? So whether it's family-owned businesses, organizations that are still founder-led, whether it's PE companies or private sector companies, when respect is missing in those rooms, a couple of things happen. Firstly, silence, right, becomes the biggest risk, right? And in many boardrooms, the absence of respect doesn't show up as conflict. It shows up as silence. Everything always looks fine. And that really becomes the default narrative. No one speaks up, right? Because you will find that disrespect is not loud. It's subtle, and it's those subtle sounds or those subtle signs that voices don't matter, right? Take, for instance, in the boardroom, oftentimes, the CHRO, their role is treated as a transactional role, right? Not necessarily strategic. So when you think about talent and you think about culture and leadership, these risks are seen as HR type risks, right? And perhaps in many occasions, the CHROs aren't giving as much airtime as the CFOs, for instance, right? So when boards don't treat the CSROs to some degree with as much respect as the CFOs, they are effectively saying that people matter less than numbers, right? And that's almost always where strategy really, really breaks. And then finally, I would say, respect sets the system, right? So CEOs don't just lead. They don't just lead people, they actually design the system, right, in which people operate. So when culture becomes performative rather than lived, boards really receive filtered information. Enterprise risk increases, and of course, ethical biases and ethical blind spots emerge. And so these are some ways that, when respect is missing, and I've given some examples about what I've seen out there, and also how I have felt in certain rooms where, I've spoken up and maybe that point wasn't necessarily documented or well taken, but when someone else speaks up with maybe the exact same thing, all of a sudden it's in the board book. And so those are some of the kind of subtle narratives that drive cultures within organizations and companies. And it's really important that we take a very, very close look at what this means in terms of people, their attrition rates, as well as the bottom line for these companies.
Thank you. I'm really sad and not surprised to hear your experience with that. And, I think we have a long ways to go on how we talk about, allyship and how really somebody else could catch that moment and speak up for you to have your back.
Yes,
And the other thing I'm hearing in what you're sharing is I think most companies are guilty of values become posters and
ex
slogans and, an afterthought. But it's
ex
exactly in these, the way you interact and behave in meetings is really where values truly show up. So it's very tied. Thank you so much. So, my friend, your top tips for everyone on how to have more respect in the workplace.
Well, that's a fun question because I don't think there's any kind of crystal ball. But I think the first thing really comes with competence, right? So, there's confidence and there's competence, right? I think they both of them go hand in hand and are complementary. But I think it's very important that as individuals, we hone our craft, right? And so we are confident in spaces. We don't have to be in multiple spaces. We don't have to be jack of all trade. But it's important that the lane that you're in, you are competent in that lane and then exhibit confidence. Know your stuff really and show your stuff, right? So that competence is as important as confidence. And then it's very important that we design respect into the system, right?
Mm.
CEOs as board members, it is imperative to build structural conditions, which include whether it's the agenda, who is included and why, norms, how much airtime do we give certain people, if there's, material to be read ahead of time, ensure that that's provided, you know, 2 weeks ahead of time so that people can review the material and come prepared as opposed to providing that material to some people with, longer leeways than others, for instance. And so that respect should really be treated as a system, not a slogan, right? It should be part of the operating model. The chair of a board, for instance, can really change the culture of a board by simply shifting from kind of the assurance to inquiry mode, right? So asking constantly, what are we not seeing, right? Because we don't know everything. So be open, be teachable. You can't know everything and you're not always right. And then the second tip that I would suggest is, make speaking up non-negotiable and protect all and every single messenger, right? So respect collapses when people fear retaliation. And I've seen that head on, right? So it is important that as leaders that we ensure that we are creating communities where people feel comfortable speaking up and be able to also protect truth telling, right? Respect should be, you should encourage people to tell the truth. You should protect that. Boards and CEOs should actively reward like early warnings, especially from, the CHRO or the CFO regarding risk, compliance, really people closest to the work. So if the culture punishes the messengers, you don't get honesty. You get surprises, right? So that would be my second tip. And then finally, elevate people and culture in the same way that, you know, rigor is taken with finance. So what I mean by that really is hold people and culture with the same rigor you hold your financials for a company. So the financials can be the result of something going right or wrong. Some boards treat culture as soft and finance as real. This shouldn't be the case. Both these aspects are very, very real and very pertinent to how companies are run today and how boards govern these companies. And when boards do this well, respect becomes measurable, right? There's better decision quality, there's earlier risk detection, stronger execution, and there's higher retention of talent, which is what we want.
Yeah, very powerful. Thank you for those metrics. I always say, yeah, that all of that really does tie back to metrics. And I'm glad you put talent as the last because, often it's, again, I love what you're saying about it isn't just about the CHRO. And, truly the CEO to me has to carry the responsibility and just as important to be that representative ambassador of the brand from an employee perspective externally and internally. The other thing you've said that I want to just do emphasize that is a big thing of mine. Why aren't we even questioning that title? HR meaning resources. People are
Mhm,
not resources.
mhm.
So I know that a lot of organizations have shifted over to chief people officer, which is great. But just to close with, again, please, people, don't use that as just a performative signal, but
Right.
actually do what Njideka is saying. Thank you so much, my friend. It's been such an honor to have you today.
Thank you so much, Bobby. The pleasure was mine. And yes, if you have a chance, grab a copy of The Twin Thieves. Like I said, I'm coaching my daughter's volleyball team this spring. And so that book has just been instrumental in really demonstrating the importance, whether on the volleyball court, in a leadership team meeting, or around a board table. Respect is what turns talent into performance and conversation into good decisions. Thanks, Bobby.
Thank you so much. I'll make sure to put a link to that book in the show notes. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a great one.